All rise for the Honorable Judge T.C. Fontaine.
Good afternoon, or evening, or morning, or whenever you're listening to this. This is the Young Kings Wrestling Podcast, episode 88, The People versus Randall Keith Orton, featuring the Sovereign Soundboard. As you can tell, this is my courtroom. In other words, I'm the man. So this is entertainment. Any inaccuracies to a legitimate trial shall be disregarded immediately. All right. If you want to tune into this trial or any past or future episodes of the Young Kings Wrestling Podcast, you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, iHeartRadio, among others, and leave us a review on iTunes if you so shall fancy yourself. Links to all the platforms are available at ykwrestling.com. You can get yourself a Black Lives Matter shirt that our guest here, our witness, Mr. We'll introduce you in a second. But go ahead and get you one of those shirts if you would like to. Participating in today's events, we have our prosecutor, Wreak Havoc Esquire, and as witnesses from the #1 wrestling podcast on Pornhub, the HWBIC, the Warden, Matt Ritter. And from the O Face Wrestling Podcast, we have JT joining us for his debut on the Young Kings Wrestling Podcast. If you follow us on Twitter, join in our conversation on social media using the hashtag YKWPod and the hashtag YKWCourt. I'm going to hand the reins over to my co-host, Mr. Wreak Havoc Esquire, and you do what you do.
Right.
Nigga, am I not here?
I am. Sometimes we don't know if you're here or not.
Wow. Okay.
Special shout out to my bailiff, Malik Ricks.
What's up? You just forgot me. Whatever. Okay. Let's give it to Rick then.
Order in the court.
Oh man. All right.
Mr. Havoc.
You cool? All right. I'm gonna give an opening statement real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, we all enjoy our wrestling programming as much as the next man. And as such, we care about the safety of the performers who do their job to entertain us throughout the week on a regular basis. Mr. Randall Keith Orton, over the past 20 odd years, has posed to not only be a threat to that safety, but potentially a threat to himself. He has demonstrated some heinous acts, as we will detail over the course of this trial. And it is clear that we need to bring these charges to this court today because this man needs to be brought to justice. He's clearly a menace, and we will prove that here today. So I'd like to present the charges, if I may. We have here on the counts aggravated assault, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 3 in the first degree, 2 in the second degree, having a charge of aggravated assault with a vehicle, 4 charges of assault with a deadly weapon, as well as 3 counts of arson, 2 of them actually happening within the same week, for a final count of 4, actually, 4 instances. Matt Ritter will know exactly what we're talking about. So yes, we have a full slate here of some charges that we'd like to bring to this court today. Some dastardly actions taking place. So with that being said, we will prove today that Randy Orton is an absolute menace to the world of professional wrestling, and he must be brought to justice. So I would like to call my first witness, Your Honor. The people call the Warden, Matt Ritter, to the stand. Mr. Ritter, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing good. Do I need to swear on a Bible or something?
You swear to
Well,
tell the truth and the whole truth and
there you
nothing
go.
but the truth. So help you, wrestling gods.
That's
I
what
do.
Malik. Malik's supposed to do that. He's the
I
best.
gotta do other people's jobs around here.
My bad. Yeah. You swear the truth.
Would that be to JBL, the wrestling god?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I do.
Wait, you swear the truth and all that other shit he just said?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right.
All right. Okay, good. Mr. Ritter, how long have you been a pro wrestling fan, sir?
I have been a pro wrestling fan since 1996, so we're looking at just shy of about 30 years.
Okay. And you've seen all manner of things happen in pro wrestling in terms of some outlandish acts in that time, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, we are aware that one of your fan favorites, one of your preferred wrestlers of choice, is Mr. Mark Calloway, also known as The Undertaker, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, on October 9th of 2005, do you recall what happened on that evening?
I believe Mr. Calloway was set on fire inside a casket.
That is correct, Your Honor. Set on fire inside a casket. To give you full context and detail, they had what was known as a casket match. The match was won by Mr. Orton, but he then proceeded to take an axe and attack the casket from the top, and then pour gasoline on said casket before igniting it in front of the people.
And if I'm not mistaken, that is
place.
attempted murder, correct?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Where did this take place, Mr. Havoc?
At the event known as No Mercy, a pay-per-view provided by the WWE. They had a sanctioned match, but then Mr. Orton committed first-degree arson, so with the intent to harm and maim. Also,
Against the law in the state of Texas, correct?
correct, absolutely.
Against the law everywhere.
I'd hope so.
Also, Mr. Ritter, 1 month later was November 29th, 2005, was a Super Tuesday for SmackDown, a special broadcast that takes place one day after Monday Night Raw, just a few days after Mr. Mark Calloway miraculously recovered from his immolation, it would seem, at Survivor Series. Do you recall what happened on this particular evening?
I do not.
So a match was taking place with Rey Mysterio versus, I believe, The Big Show. And The Undertaker, Mr. Mark Calloway, appeared to then be attacked by Mr. Randy Orton, who then placed him on top of the lowrider in tribute to Mr. Eddie Guerrero, who had passed away. And he drove said lowrider into the stage, crashing it through, and also inciting an explosion due to said crash. Do you recall this, Mr. Ritter?
I do recall this.
Okay.
I was terrified for The Undertaker's life. After almost being cut to pieces with a hatchet and then set on fire and surviving to be attacked. And as someone who has taken a ride on the hood of a car and fallen off the hood of a car and broken bones, it is not a pleasant experience, but in no way, shape, or form was I driven into a wall that caused an explosion that had to not only be traumatic and terrifying, but again, life-threatening.
Absolutely terrifying, Your Honor. Now, on to a few other charges really quickly. Mr. Ritter, we also know that you are an avid fan of Mr. Bray Wyatt.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, on the day of February 28th of 2017, there was a segment filmed between Mr. Randy Orton and Mr. Bray Wyatt. Do you recall this segment, Mr. Ritter?
I do.
Well, for if it please the court, Your Honor, on this said segment, Randy Orton not only betrayed his cohort in Bray Wyatt, but he also was inside the Wyatt family compound, which allegedly contained the ashes of one sister, Abigail, but he then proceeded to burn down said compound with no other occupants within it, so it's second degree, but he burned down this compound in full view of the audience. You recall this, Mr. Ritter?
I do. Mr. Orton had befriended Bray, worked his way into the family, divided and destroyed the family, and then as a last act, burned down the home that the family lived in and desecrated the grave of Bray Wyatt's dead sister, Abigail.
Oh my God.
Absolutely tragic. And finally, Mr. Ritter, one that I believe will hit home for you the hardest. Within the past year, we've seen Bray Wyatt undergo a change in his character. He has since taken on the moniker of The Fiend as an alter ego of sorts. And this past December, we saw some very, very atrocious acts take place between himself and Mr. Randy Orton. Do you recall this past December, Mr. Ritter?
Vividly.
So December 14th, first and foremost, before we get to the worst of the worst, December 14th on Monday Night Raw, there was a segment where Bray Wyatt, not as The Fiend, Bray Wyatt was backstage. He was attacked by Mr. Randy Orton. He was placed in a trunk of sorts, which Mr. Orton, once again, to his heinous nature, doused in gasoline and set ablaze. Out came The Fiend to attack Mr. Orton, but the act clearly was as previous ones, to maim and harm in a great detail. So that was Monday. 6 days later, December 20th, the TLC pay-per-view. Now, I'm aware you recall this very well, Mr. Ritter. Can you tell us what happened on that evening?
There was a match scheduled. It was what is known in wrestling as an Inferno match, where the objective of the match is to light a part of your opponent's body on fire. This is now in response to Randy Orton setting this trunk ablaze with Bray Wyatt inside. I want to be clear that to this point, Randy Orton has refused to just accept the fact that he has taken everything from Bray, destroyed his family, taken his championship, and burned down his house. He has now come back, and out of desperation, this alter ego, this entity, the Fiend, has come back to defend and get retribution on Randy Orton for these heinous acts. And Randy then proceeded to not only defeat the Fiend, but douse him fully in gasoline and light his entire body on fire, essentially committing murder live on TV.
Absolutely disgusting. Thank you very much, Mr. Ritter. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Havoc Esquire. Who would you like to call to the stand next?
People rest. Defense have anything?
I would like to call to the stand Mr. JT from the Old Face Wrestling Podcast. On the defense, apparently he would like to act as a witness, testifying on behalf of the defendant, Mr. Randall Keith Orton.
All right. Mr. JT, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good. Well, I understand that you feel that there is some defense that should be levied in favor of Mr. Orton.
Absolutely.
Well, I had a few questions for you, sir. The very first charge goes as far back as 2003. Mr. Orton, on full view of the audience at home, made a decision to not only assault Mr. Mick Foley, a legend and today a Hall of Famer, but he also kicked him down a flight of stairs. First-degree aggravated assault with the intent to maim. Which is not his first time. It wouldn't be the only time where he would assault someone unprovoked. I have March 21st of 2005, performed an RKO on Stacy Keibler, completely unprovoked. August of 2007, he punt kicked John Cena Sr., John Cena's father, in the head while he was sitting in the audience. Do you recall these instances, Mr. JT?
I recall I didn't witness them live when it happened, but I did recall, seeing them, throughout highlights and stuff like that. So I do know about all of them.
Correct. Okay. Well, I'm just curious, what justified Mr. Orton to commit these particular actions?
Well, with Mick Foley, I think it was more of a, helping Mick Foley get out of wrestling. I mean, at that point in time, he had no business being a wrestler. He had killed himself multiple times prior to that. He's been thrown off Hell in a Cell. He should not have been in the ring. So that was kind of Randy Orton kind of just saying, hey, Mick, I need to put you out of your misery. You can't be doing this anymore. He was just trying to help Mick Foley. Stacey Keibler, she should know better. Being in the ring with Randy Orton, it doesn't matter if you are male or female, he will RKO you. He's done it multiple times. He did it, even Nia Jax at, Royal Rumble about like 2 years ago. There's, that's kind of on her. I believe, you're in the ring with someone, who has voices in his head, which is uncontrollable for Randy Orton. So sometimes, that's kind of doing it to yourself. And then, John Cena Sr., no business being in that feud. He should not have been in that ring with Orton as well. Like, this is between Randy and John.
John Cena Sr. was a member of the audience. He was a paid fan in attendance, and he should not have been included in Mr. Orton's deviant actions. Continue.
But as history shows it, if you are in attendance and there's a feud going on between a relative of yours and another wrestler, it's happened multiple times where you may be a target of the wrestler that your son whatever is feuding against. So it's kind of like, at the same time, you should know maybe something's going to happen. Maybe I shouldn't be front row, something like that.
You mentioned that he felt that Mick Foley needed to be aided in his exit from wrestling, as though he was doing him a favor. I'd like to take you to another charge later down the line here. January 27th of 2020, and Adam Copeland, also known as Edge, had returned after 10 years away from wrestling after being diagnosed with spinal stenosis. Supposedly was never allowed to wrestle again, miraculously made it back, and Randy Orton, one night after his return, decided that he would attack and perform the concerto. Your Honor, a concerto is when a chair is placed underneath the head of the victim, and another chair is then swung right on top of the head, as though to sandwich the two between two steel chairs. Do you recall this happening, Mr. JT?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So Randy Orton's rationale for this 1 week later was that he felt also that Edge needed to be given a, what's the word I'm looking for here? Needs to be given his gracious exit from wrestling. He needed to be taken away because he, didn't need to be in wrestling anymore. He was just an adrenaline junkie in the moment, and he was doing him a favor of sorts. So are you suggesting to this court, Mr. JT, that Randy Orton is some sort of a sadistic guardian angel to these wrestlers who need to be taken out of wrestling?
Absolutely. Edge's injury that, led him to his early retirement is no joke. He could have been paralyzed, and I understand that he had a second surgery and he felt, fine after it. But at the same time, we've seen from Paige, when she got hurt and came back, it took just one little kick from Sasha Banks that, it could have been anyone who could have done that. And then boom, she's out again, Edge coming back in wrestling is very dangerous to himself. And Randy Orton feels like, hey, like you shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to try to give you that early exit, just that realization that, you shouldn't be doing this anymore. Your body's more important.
Mm-hmm. Do you consider Mr. Orton to be a truthful individual, sir?
I do.
You do? I see. So I'd like to take you back to 2009, where Randy Orton claimed to have what is known as IED, also intermittent explosive disorder. Do you recall this instance?
I do not.
Well, he explained that there's a condition that allows him, that provokes him to explode in a sense, and to have an outrage of anger and rage, where he assaults individuals. And one of the charges here was that he actually assaulted the chairman and CEO of WWE, Mr. Vince McMahon, who at the time was well over 60 years old and not a contracted wrestler either. So with no documentation of said condition, how can we believe that Mr. Orton really suffered from these afflictions?
Well, personally, considering the fact that he attacked the chairman, Vince McMahon, I feel like that's kind of on WWE. If whether Randy Orton does or doesn't have this condition, I feel like it's WWE's duty to actually get him looked at by a doctor to see if this is true or not. Whether they have or haven't, that's kind of on them. They allow him to still be employed with the company after 20 years now. And he's been doing his thing for multiple years, like you said, lighting people on fire, beating up, people that aren't even wrestlers, like Vince McMahon, John Cena's dad. They know very well what he's capable of and what he's done, and they still allow him to wrestle for their company. So it's kind of like, I feel like if anyone's guilty, it's them. They're allowing this guy to go around and raise havoc for all these, these last 2 decades. Why aren't they on trial? Why is Randy Orton?
Interesting question. Well, I thank you, Mr. JT. No further questions, Your Honor. Now, we would now like to call Mr. T.C. Fontaine to the stand.
Wait, you calling a judge to the stand? What the type of court case is this?
I believe
This
he
is
is.
my courtroom. Mr. Bailey, please do your job.
My bad.
As you forgot to do your job with our last.
My bad. I'm just thinking he's guaranteed to get off, but continue.
Swear me in, please.
All right.
Man, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? That ain't no answer. That's not an answer.
Whose courtroom is this?
Hey. All right, go ahead. Do you think?
All right. Mr. Fontaine, what brings you to this courtroom today, sir?
I'm the judge.
Correct. What compels you to testify here this afternoon?
I've been a huge fan of Mr. Randall Orton, despite all his crimes, but the law is the law, and I'm here to uphold the law if need be. Is there any concern at all that you may have some bias due to your fandom of Mr. Orton, sir? Possibly. Take it back to around the time any of these charges actually took place. June 2003, when I was a young little boy, I had the gracious opportunity of meeting Mr. Randall Keith Orton at the now demolished Omaha Civic Auditorium in Omaha, Nebraska. I see. And was that the same June of 2003 in which he then assaulted Mick Foley, kicking him down this flight of stairs? Correct. So it's possible that you've only really gotten to see one side of Mr. Orton in a sense, because you
also, you feel as though you've been deceived in a sense.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm. So you believe that these actions, a lot of them from Mr. Orton, are justifiable? Is that what you're suggesting here?
Absolutely not. A lot of these charges are especially heinous. More notably, charge last January against one Adam Copeland Edge. If you know me, Edge, also one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Notably, I'm looking at the charges here. Let me go ahead and get my glasses. I see that he performed RKO on Mr. Copeland's wife, Beth Phoenix Copeland,
Yes.
just weeks later,
Yes.
after assaulting her husband, correct?
Correct. And also after putting her through some severe emotional trauma, detailing her husband's trials and tribulations through injuries and suffering, and also, in a sense, trying to justify why he assaulted her husband on national TV and blaming her for why he did what he did.
Okay. And I also see here, Mr. Orton, just a few weeks before that, he says a concerto to Matt Hardy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And also I see here we have he attacked Paul White, the Big Show, Christian Cage, and Hall of Famers Ric Flair and Shawn Michael Hickenbottom with the steel chair.
Correct.
In the dark. What is in the dark mean?
So Mr. Orton posed as a janitor of sorts, and he found a back room where these legends and Hall of Famers were, I believe, playing poker. He entered this room, and wearing night vision goggles, he shut the lights off in the room where all these occupants took place. And he then took a chair and assaulted all of them in the dark. When the lights were restored to the room, all of them had been laid out and assaulted, and Mr. Orton had miraculously disappeared.
Oh my God.
Your Honor, if I may, I would like to add that these actions, Christian at the time left wrestling due to concussions and then received a punt to the head. Matt Hardy, clearly mentally unstable, beating him in the head with the chair does not help that situation. And Mr. Hickenbottom, Shawn Michaels, attacking him in the dark when clearly he already has one lazy eye and has a hard time seeing. Not completely fair to go after this man who can only see properly out of one eye in the dark.
Correct. Absolutely, Your Honor. And also, I'd also like to point out that there were several, these were just the bulk of the charges that we could bring in. There is such a laundry list that I could not compile all of them together. But within the same year, Randy Orton would also go on to punt kick Mr. Christian Cage in the head, who suffered from the concussions. I believe this was.
I would like to object, Mr. Esquire. I see here on the notes that punt kicking Christian occurred during an unsanctioned match. What is an unsanctioned match, Mr. Ritter?
It is a match that is non-sanctioned by the WWE. Therefore, any injury occurred to a wrestler in that match, the WWE is not liable for. That does not necessarily mean Randy Orton is not liable for his actions, just the company under which the actions occur.
Interesting.
That's correct. That's correct.
Also, preface, we see he punt kicked the chairman and CEO, Vincent K. McMahon.
Correct.
On January 29th, 2009. I would like to circle back around to Mr. JT's statement that he was not a contracted wrestler. One of you fellas said he was not a contracted wrestler. I'm looking here on cagematch.net, and I see that Mr. Vincent K. McMahon participated in 4 matches after this event occurred. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
So it looks to me that he is an active participant in that ring.
When he so chooses to, he will, on a part-time basis, participate in matches, more so out of his own hubris than anything in terms of competition.
And it was within my understanding that within this corporate structure known as the World Wrestling Entertainment, the executives, they have separate talent contracts, correct?
They do.
So it seems to me that Mr. McMahon was contracted as a talent. Is it possible that he may have been acting as a talent on that night this incident occurred?
There is nothing that can prove that he was doing such a thing, Your Honor. He was present in his suit, acting as chairman and CEO of the company at the time. He never once declared himself to be active, or at least suggested that he was there to participate in any activities.
Do wrestlers not wear suits?
They do. They do.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, did he not also sexually assault the daughter of chairman and CEO of WWE, Vince McMahon, kissing her without consent in the middle of a ring?
He did. He absolutely did. First he would go on to DDT Miss Stephanie McMahon, leaving her prone in the ring in front of her husband, Mr. Paul Levesque, aka Triple H. As she lay there unconscious, Mr. Orton would then proceed to kiss her without consent, as Mr. Ritter said.
Mr. Levesque did not intervene.
He was handcuffed to the ropes and essentially he was forced to watch as Mr. Orton committed these acts.
As an expert witness from Pornhub, I can testify that this is what is known as cuckolding. Randy Orton cuckolded Triple H live on TV.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
That's correct.
Without
Your
consent.
Honor, just to be fair,
Yes.
Mrs. Hemsley McMahon, whatever you want to call her, a few years prior, her husband did the same thing. That's how they got married on TV. She was drunk, she was drugged, she was knocked out, and they went through a drive-through.
Objection. Order in the court. This is not about Mr. Levesque. This is about.
Oh, I'm just saying, are we bringing up charges on him too? Then I'm just saying, we got to be fair.
In another trial, we can.
Objection.
Trial, we will.
Objection. Relevance, Your Honor.
Your Honor, how did you throw out an objection to?
I believe what Mr. Riggs is trying to do, while I do not agree with it, is
I'm sorry.
He's trying to establish that this may be a kink of Miss Stephanie McMahon, and this may not be an issue because there are prior instances where she is engaged in such a manner. So maybe the cuckolding was not against her will. I believe that's
maybe.
Well, no,
objection to relevance is not listed as one of the charges, so it honestly doesn't matter in the end.
Fair enough.
Well, Mrs. McMahon is not on trial, Your Honor. Mr. Orton is, and so
Yes.
that I find that his actions not only contribute to these charges that are being brought, but also just goes to show the type of character, the man that we're dealing with here today. So, that being said, what else do we have here? Oh, I'd like to point out, Your Honor, there were several charges that we opted not to bring to trial today, two of which we just chose not to pursue. They involve one, the Fabulous Moolah and Mr. Terrence Bollea. We will not be bringing these charges to court today for reasons undisclosed. But
it is within my understanding that Mr. Orton is possibly innocent on those charges and incredibly justified.
Dismissed.
as I said, we haven't disclosed why we're not bringing these charges to court today, but we have within good reason to believe that it didn't contribute to these charges here today, and so we opted not to bring them. But also, one instance that we did not bring up yet was from November 26th of 2006, which was one of the worst. I'm sorry, November 27th, which was one of the worst instances of Mr. Orton's devastating and just absolutely disgusting actions. A 60-year-old Ric Flair apparently who had been assaulted backstage, and during a segment of Mr. Copeland, aka Edge, his show, The Cutting Edge, they went back to the backstage area and pulled out Mr. Flair, who had been bloodied already, and right in the front of the ring, in full view of the audience, in the ring, in the arena, and at home, he proceeded to give a concerto to Mr. Flair, who had already been seemingly knocked unconscious. And it's just absolutely, it was abhorrent what happened here. And then just 14 years later, in 2020, he also assaulted Mr. Flair, who now is over the age of 70, had survived almost a life-threatening occurrence, was in the hospital on life support. He had just come back recently in the midst of a pandemic, assaulted this man to no audience, of course, because it was the pandemic and they were in the performance center, but the audience at home could all see it. And he would proceed to not only give him a low blow into his testicles, but he also would go on to punt kick him in the head.
Woo!
It's just absolutely, absolutely disgusting, Your Honor.
I don't know what to say about these charges here, but I will take them into consideration.
Well, with that, I'm going to give my summation here. We've heard these charges. We've heard testimony from our witnesses. Whatever your opinions is of Mr. Orton, there can be no denying whatsoever that this man clearly is unsafe. He is unstable. He is just unhinged at times. This is not the kind of talent that you want to have in not only in your employ, but in your locker room. Sure, there's some liability on the company for allowing him to continue to be a part of the company, but when you're contracted, you have a responsibility. This is a PG programming since 2008. We have several charges that range from well beyond 2008. But even before then, these actions are absolutely unforgivable and just reprehensible. There is no excuse for them. Even creating some kind of condition that does not apply to him. He is untrustworthy, he is dishonest, and he is absolutely a threat to the company with which he resides. And I believe that you must find him guilty on all charges.
I think that we should consider having them arrested.
Do I have any other statements from our witnesses, possibly our bailiff? Would you like to chime in on anything?
I would like
Yes,
to
sir.
Honor.
We'll have you, Mr. Riggs, go first, and then JT, you can give your statements follow.
Your Honor, on the defense of Mr. Orton, I put the blame on a lot of on the company. This guy is a loony, and you continue to let him come out here and do these things to people. You let them, these guys are letting their parents near them, their wives and everything. You think my wife would be next to someone who would kick her in the head, RKO her? You think I'm putting my wife in there? Anybody in my company? No, sir. So it should be a deeper. This is something deeper than Mr. Randall Keith Orton. Just want to throw that out there.
JT.
All right, so I wanted to throw two things out there. First of all, I believe that Randy Orton is a huge asset to the WWE business. I think we can all agree, out of all of their full-time active wrestlers, he is the biggest star on that roster. He's the most well-known amongst, your casual fan base. And he's always, he sells tickets. He's a huge asset to the company. And at the same time, you had mentioned, some of his crimes, that he did against Bray Wyatt and Undertaker. But didn't Bray Wyatt and Undertaker commit all these crimes to other people prior? Was maybe Randy Orton was doing justice as like a Batman kind of vigilant kind of thing?
Objection.
Undertaker.
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Wyatt and Mr. Calloway are not on trial here today. Mr. Orton is on trial. Their actions do not contribute to what Mr. Orton has done throughout the course of his career, which is absolutely unforgivable.
Excuses.
And to add to that, to my knowledge, Mr. Wyatt has never burned down anyone's home or lit anyone on fire.
Correct.
Okay.
But Undertaker has done some crazy things like kidnapping the boss's daughter and hanging her on a cross. Maybe Randy Orton's trying to get rid of some of these villains from the business to help out the actual business itself. Maybe he's doing a favor to the chairman. As far as Bray Wyatt, I know this is a trial, on Randy Orton. I'm just justifying why maybe he did these things to, for the benefit of the business. But yeah, at the end of the day, Randy Orton is an asset. He brings in the money. He's the big name. I feel like that he should be innocent due to the fact that he is such an asset to the company.
I'd like to respond to that. Your Honor, I'd like to point out that during the time in which Mr. JT speaks of with the kidnapping of Mr. McMahon's daughter, I'd like to point out that Undertaker was operating under the guise of the higher power, which was Mr. McMahon himself. So in a sense, he was doing what he was told to do, kidnapping his daughter and forcing a marriage with her upon a cross. But these are directives that he was given by this higher power, which was Vince McMahon himself.
Once again, Your Honor, I believe this company should be on trial rather than Mr. Randall Keith Orton. Just as Mr. Havoc has said, the company is the reason why The Undertaker created Havoc. No pun.
So what we're arguing here is that the society that has created Randy Orton is to blame and not the man who committed the actions. We don't condemn the man who harmed other people, but we blame the society in which he came up in for it. And we're just going to ignore these heinous acts that he's created. I'm not going to draw comparisons to current day America, but I do believe that the people that commit those actions, regardless of the environment they were brought up in, also need to be held accountable for their actions, Your Honor.
Okay. Absolutely. I agree 100%, Your Honor.
Black Lives Matter.
Yes, sir.
So, the verdict, I believe the verdict is in.
Wait. The defense didn't get to go. He didn't get to talk to nobody. He just got the verdict.
Nobody from Randy Orton's defense showed up here today. So
Okay.
He could not have there is no lawyer that would defend what this man has done.
I have viable statements from the witness that I've taken into consideration. There's no jury. I'm the judge, jury, and the executioner. I am
and the witness.
I am a witness as well. Do not justify the actions of Mr. Randall Keith Orton, but I also do agree with our defense here. Possibly he was acting in good faith with some of these. He just didn't go about it the right way, possibly. With that being said, I am going to rule in favor of the prosecution. I am going to go ahead and get Randy Orton on these charges here. First degree aggravated assault, punt kicking John Cena Sr. in the head. John Cena Sr. is a fan. He was a fan in paid attendance. He is a family member of other talent. He, regardless of where he was seated, regardless of what programs Mr. Cena's son was working that night, he should not have been involved or gotten forcibly involved by Mr. Orton. So I will get him on that charge there. Punt kicking Vince McMahon Sr., Vince McMahon Jr. in the head. As WWE chairman, I have taken into consideration that Mr. McMahon possibly wasn't looking for any action at that time. So I will say he was acting on behalf of the company. RKOing Miss Stacy Keibler. It is within my knowledge that they were an item at the time. And this was really just him asserting himself for no apparent reason. We'll get him on that charge, as well as an aggravated assault charge on Miss Beth Phoenix Copeland, the Hall of Famer, after causing some emotional trauma. On the counts of aggravated assault with the vehicle, looking at the context of what was going on between Mr. Orton and Mr. Calloway at the time, I cannot rule in favor of the prosecution on that one. Seems like it was a lot of back and forth going on between the two. Within my understanding, just about a week earlier, Mr. Calloway showed up and kind of tried to assert himself and assault the entire SmackDown roster at the end of a pay-per-view. Is that correct? Or am I misremembering?
That is correct, but his objective was to reach Mr. Orton himself. Mr. Orton ran away, and the SmackDown locker room simply was collateral damage.
So then you go after the person you're looking for and not the entire roster who had nothing to do with it.
Your Honor, the man was angry.
Objection. Moving forward. Assault with a deadly weapon. I see he was acting in a collusion with Mr. Copeland against a bloodied Ric Flair in 2006. Therefore, I will rule on behalf of the defense here. I cannot charge Mr. Orton with the assault with a deadly weapon on Mr. Adam Copeland on January 27, 2020. As stated by the defense, he was doing some vigilante efforts. Assuming I'm sure Mr. Copeland has some skeletons in his closet that we might have to pull out in the future. Go forward with that. I'll rule on behalf of the prosecution on a charge of aggravated assault against Ric Flair, as well as against Matt Hardy. And the aggravated assault charge, assault with a deadly weapon charge on Legends Night against Hall of Famers, Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels, future Hall of Famers, Big Show, and Christian. I will rule on behalf of the prosecution. Arson. I am ruling on behalf of the prosecution on all charges of arson. October 9th, 2005. Seems like this was not within the confines of a casket match to be lighting the casket on fire. So it was not within the confines of the match, regardless of any back and forth that Mr. Calloway and Mr. Orton went through in the year 2005. Was not within the confines of the match. I'm ruling on behalf of the prosecution. February 28th, 2017, he burned down the Wyatt compound. Again, was not within the confines of what was going on. Was not within the rules of the match. So I cannot rule on behalf of the defense there. And we have 2 charges of first-degree arson on December 14th and December 20th, 2020. Ignited a storage container with Bray Wyatt inside, regardless of if the Fiend Bray Wyatt immediately popped out of that storage unit. Cannot rule on behalf of the defense here. And TLC was not within the confines of the match. So on behalf of the prosecution, I am convicting Mr. Orton on all of these charges. To what? I don't know. If I see him on Monday night, I'll probably cheer for him. This is a mock trial. There's nothing to do with anything here. We're just having fun. So don't take this seriously, anybody. We love Randy Orton here. Some of us.
He needs to go to jail.
Your Honor, I appreciate you letting me come here to testify, to speak my piece on the situation, especially seeing as the majority of these acts were people that I've grown up to be big fans of. And I really do appreciate you allowing me to come here and speak to my knowledge of cuckolding as the #1 wrestling podcast on Pornhub. I do have to leave, though, so I am going to graciously...
Before you leave, plug your socials, Mr. Riddick.
You guys can find me and more cuckold talk at Matt Ritter. That is at MATTRIDDER on Twitter. Also at the Smacking Raw Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, anything you need, you guys can find there. So go check me out.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter. Thank you for taking the stand here. JT, go ahead and plug your social, sir.
All right. Thank you all for having me on the show. This was really fun. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. Just search O Face Wrestling and bam, will pop up.
Indeed. Mr. Bailiff, Malik Riggs.
What's up? You can find me on Instagram at Malik.lv. There's no need to follow me on Twitter, but if you want to, it's Malik SYP. I need to change my name. SYP is no longer a thing. So yeah, new name coming soon.
At Malik YKW.
Maybe. Hopefully.
Maybe. Mr. Havoc Esquire.
You can find me at WreakHavoc24 on Instagram and on Twitter. But also go check out the Havoc Hour on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. Talking a lot of sports and entertainment, PFLs, back in swing. Got a lot of content that's getting ready to come out soon, so go check that out.
And I am the Honorable Judge T.C. Fontaine presiding over the court today. You can go ahead and find us on most social media except Instagram. We will deal with that legal matter in the future. But if you want to follow us on Instagram, currently it's YK Wrestling _. Everything else is just simply YK Wrestling. And figure we have no further statements, correct, from the court?
Justice was served.
Justice was served here today. This meeting is adjourned. And I would like to say, Mr. Randall Keith Orton.
Stop it. Get some help.
We're out of here. Go on.
Go on.